Let us dive right in with that spot by the garage. Looking at the aerial drone footage, I spotted exactly 3 entryways located across the rear of the property. One entryway appeared linked directly to the carport, while the other 2 provided access straight into the main living quarters. The fascinating part is that none of these were your typical sliding patio panels. Instead, I noticed classic glass panes installed right into the upper sections of the wood. Furthermore, Savannah explicitly mentioned that multiple entry points had been wedged wide open by the time her sibling, Annie, and brother-in-law Latimer finally showed up at the scene. Here is the most recent intelligence regarding the contents of that letter. I have been gathering insights from federal agents and regional police contacts scattered across the entire nation. My informant is absolutely flawless in his reliability. He completely confirmed that multiple security lenses got intentionally destroyed, heavily implying the perpetrator possessed advanced knowledge regarding their exact hiding spots. Furthermore, the vehicle registered to Savannah Guthrie's sibling, Annie Guthrie, got hauled away, securely locked up, and seized as official proof. Our intel originated from a contact who practically never makes mistakes. Plus, the bombshell he dropped definitely was not just some minor footnote within this ongoing investigation. We are not talking about a single glitchy lens. Several recording devices went dark completely simultaneously. This brings up a highly intriguing theory. An individual clearly possessed deep knowledge of the monitoring setup, acting with absolute deliberation rather than sheer coincidence. Yet that detail hardly forms the most complex layer. The household automobile, namely the transport tied to Savannah Guthrie's kin, got dragged off, secured, and rigorously evaluated. The specific phrasing used here truly sparks intense curiosity. Rather than a concrete accusation, officials framed it as an active investigative angle. They hinted at the final associated individual using those exact terms. Over 2 long months have slipped by, and that ride remains unreturned. A journalist waited near a neighborhood shop while mechanics rebuilt the machine following an exhaustive forensic teardown. A veteran assault squad leader pointed out something quite fascinating. Every detective operation aims to construct an incredibly airtight narrative, leaving absolutely zero space for skepticism during the final community briefing. Achieving such certainty requires keeping all gathered materials flawlessly preserved, particularly those highly critical artifacts from start to finish. However, an obvious mystery remains almost completely unaddressed by the masses. If the authorities remain totally silent, why is that automobile still sitting in custody? Furthermore, if major clues truly surfaced, what is causing this massive ongoing delay? Maybe an entirely different scenario exists. An alternate theory might radically shift the entire detective focus while fundamentally transforming our understanding of the automobile's actual purpose. It represents far more than a simple clue dispenser. It might effectively shield one suspect while unintentionally turning up the heat on somebody else. Make sure to stick around, since upcoming segments tackle a huge mystery involving 3 distinct schedules. These crucial calendar marks have already been flagged for the official enforcement teams. Yet nobody has successfully pieced those fragments together so far. Be sure to hit that thumbs up and join our community. This singular puzzle piece might absolutely shatter our current perspective on the whole ordeal. Before diving into the weeds, newcomers should recognize how twisted this narrative truly gets. Multiple deep aspects exist which mainstream media outlets blindly skip past, yet our channel breaks down every granular fact. Federal agents officially verified their active participation in the probe. Keep in mind, the final strategy regarding these developments rests entirely within the hands of Savannah Guthrie and her relatives. Currently, I suspect her daughter's husband stands as the primary target. That is the exact phrase. Her daughter's husband likely represents the main target right now. I am remaining exceptionally cautious, having previously reported on the Elizabeth Smart abduction. I spent 5 entire weeks stationed in Salt Lake City during her disappearance. I vividly remember countless voices aggressively pushing the narrative that Ed Smart represented the ultimate guilty party back then. Let us rewind to a completely mundane starting line. Late that afternoon, Nancy Guthrie, an aging yet incredibly astute and self-reliant lady, departed her residence to enjoy supper over at her child's place. This trip felt totally standard, representing a classic household tradition. Those deeply bonded homes sat incredibly close together, requiring a mere couple of minutes to cross. That particular twilight unfolded exactly as expected. Sharing supper, engaging in warm chatter, followed by casual board games, mirrored countless prior nights. That sheer, boring predictability makes the ensuing chaos utterly mind-boggling. Nobody lounging indoors suspected this date would become etched in history. All signs pointed to tomorrow unfolding predictably, with standard routines continuing while Nancy comfortably arrived back at her own address. However, as the twilight hours finally wrapped up, somebody chauffeured Nancy straight back to her property. That automobile pulled away almost immediately afterwards. A minuscule window of merely a couple minutes passed, yet it transformed into the absolute most vital sequence within the official logs. This marked the final verified moment she stood safely inside her residence. Neighborhood lenses captured the proof perfectly, while logs pulled from the smart locks aligned identically with those visuals. The absolute second those hinges shut, the ride sped off into the distance. All subsequent events vanished into total darkness, starting right when the driver departed. She remained securely indoors. Instantly, a mysterious chronological blind spot stretching across numerous hours materialized. Even today, nobody has managed to explain that missing window. This forms the bleeding core of the entire saga. Dawn broke, Nancy missed her deeply ingrained routine, and the atmosphere shifted violently. Dispatchers received alerts triggering an instantaneous law enforcement response. Official bureaus tackled numerous angles concurrently. Officers locked down the perimeter, tactical teams rolled out in force, and neighbors got heavily questioned to scrape together fresh leads. Crucially, detectives impounded a pair of automobiles for strict scrutiny. The initial ride belonged to Nancy towed directly out of her subdivision a couple days later. Her personal transport held tight ties to the chronological events at her house. Eventually, authorities indicated they were handing the keys back to her relatives. However, that secondary ride told a vastly wilder tale. This exact machine served as Nancy's chauffeur during that final twilight, representing the ultimate proof of her existence. Detectives hauled this machine away for forensics shortly afterwards as well. Unlike its counterpart, it never made it back. Over 2 months vanished, yet that ride stays trapped inside the police impound lots. Officials provided zero timelines and completely withheld teardown completion updates. Handing back one key while trapping the other hardly feels like a pure coincidence. Within standard detective playbooks, hoarding specific evidence, way past normal limits, represents a highly calculated move. Cops rarely announce their motives, yet this blatant stalling screams volumes. Investigators clearly value something hidden inside that ride, particularly since they blasted way past standard mechanical processing deadlines. Such aggressive hoarding begs a massive inquiry. What exact secrets are they hunting for? Halfway through this maddening wait, an investigative reporter managed to deliver a sharper picture regarding the automobile's current physical state. Let us get straight to the explosive facts about this lockdown car, currently held tight by law enforcement at a regional lab rather than being released. The crucial detail here is that investigators were putting it back together. Those words hold immense weight because casually glancing at a vehicle never involves such an extreme step. However, during hardcore forensic evaluations, this action points directly to a precise phase of the probe. Detectives doing this kind of deep dive go way beyond looking at the paint job, stripping the machine down entirely. They completely rip out the interior panels, carefully scrutinizing and testing every single component. Rebuilding the automobile only happens once the exhaustive teardown finishes up. Simply put, reconstructing the vehicle definitely does not mark the start of their search. Rebuilding actually signals that the forensic team is wrapping things up. Yet despite finishing the heavy lifting, cops refuse to hand the keys back to the original owners. A mechanical hiccup caused this delay, demanding further explanation. While pulling the digital footprint, the internal computer crashed, forcing the crew to fix it first. While that excuse makes sense and adds context settling for just that, narrative feels incomplete. After all, mechanical fixes eventually show up, so formally hit a cold, below finish line. Criminal probes, however, drag on indefinitely. Furthermore, the tone police use regarding this specific ride implies something far deeper than mere maintenance. As seasoned experts note, they prioritize absolute precision over rushing. They want airtight evidence with absolutely zero loopholes. This perfectly justifies holding certain items hostage for months. And this specific automobile falls right into that category. We should stop asking why it remains locked away and start wondering what purpose it serves. Ultimately, the physical exterior means nothing compared to the hidden digital logs tucked inside. We are talking about mapping the whole trip, meaning this machine operates as much more than simple transportation. It serves as a literal black box. That specific logbook might potentially unlock the biggest mystery of this entire ordeal, especially since he actually revealed the footage. The visual is honestly quite mind-blowing to witness. I clearly spotted federal agency trucks pulling up sporting pitch-black glass alongside specialized crime scene units. Once we finally caught a glimpse, we realized the operator never manually activates this tracker. Nobody can shut it down either, considering the software constantly hums in the background, logging absolutely everything. It captures geographic coordinates, pathways, parking spots, and exact timestamps flawlessly. Any pause made during those crucial hours gets permanently etched into the hard drive tracking velocity, throttle ignition status, and hinge movements without relying on flawed human recollection. Every single tick of the clock gets permanently archived. Incredibly, these raw metrics completely ignore human emotions, panic, or subjective prejudices. Instead of narrating events, the computer documents reality exactly as it unfolds. Furthermore, the tracking capabilities extend way beyond that. The onboard computer tracks Bluetooth pairings, typed navigation destinations, and tiny driver habits that usually slip completely under the radar. To put it simply, anytime the automobile headed down a particular street, the software memorized that exact trajectory forever. Furthermore, insiders working closely on the forensic breakdown have verified that this massive trove of intelligence was already extracted and fully analyzed. Now apply all these technical facts to the critical window of that fateful evening. Detectives have isolated 3 distinct chronological markers. These aren't wild guesses, but hard device metrics, with the first timestamp highlighting an unexpected glitch in the surveillance grid. The second instance logs sudden physical motion, while the final stamp indicates a total signal dropout. Together, these 3 milestones create a brief yet monumentally significant window of time. So the ultimate mystery boils down to the car's exact whereabouts during that blackout gap. Was it cruising around town, or just parked quietly in some alternate spot? Did the sensors log any action? Fortunately, concrete answers to these puzzles exist directly inside the code rather than verbal claims. Crucially, this digital trail remains completely untouched, with absolutely zero tampering. Involved investigators face exactly 2 potential scenarios. The automobile was either present or completely absent. The authorities already possess this truth, though it remains hidden from the public eye. Drop a comment with your current location because the massive audience tracking this mystery stretches across the entire globe. Let us pivot to the major plot twist. One silent presumption has heavily influenced exactly how the public digests this whole nightmare. Surprisingly, nobody really says the quiet part out loud. People just assume the cops seized the truck strictly to build a case against the individual behind the wheel. This specific bias launched endless wild rumors driving the narrative down a very distinct path. Ironically, detectives officially cleared that associated individual of any wrongdoing at the very beginning. However, viewing these identical details through an alternative lens flips the entire narrative completely on its head. Imagine if the electronic logs completely absolve the driver of guilt, acting as a massive proof of their absolute innocence. Instead, should the internal tracker prove the ride never circled back after originally departing the zone? Or if it highlights the chassis sitting perfectly parked elsewhere for several hours, the overall implications shift drastically. Under those circumstances, the machine stops fueling paranoia and transforms into pure vindication. It supplies unfiltered live metrics that are nearly impossible to hack and even harder to debate. This brings up a massive revelation. While witness testimonies constantly morph over time, raw computer metrics stay locked forever. When analyzing facts, ambiguity becomes incredibly weaponized by critics, particularly when scrutinizing the final individual spotted on the chronological timeline. However, the arrival of crystal-clear analytics does way more than simply solve the puzzle. It aggressively kills off all wild theories, proving that exhibits sometimes exist purely to end rumors. Once bulletproof metrics surface, they go beyond simply shielding a suspect. They completely erase that individual from the investigative lens altogether. Finding out the GPS logged the automobile parked safely across town during the danger zone does way more than just back up an alibi. It practically shuts down that investigative avenue permanently. Once detectives scrap a theory entirely, all the paranoia tied to it vanishes instantly. Amazingly, authorities dropped this bombshell clearance super early in the hunt. The department released a formal press bulletin declaring the relatives completely free from any criminal accusations. That pivot felt incredibly fast and aggressively definitive. We must ask ourselves what exactly pushed the task force to such a rapid verdict, considering the multitude of elements at play. People throw around buzzwords like mutual compliance and standard tests, but one silent hero rarely gets credit: the automobile's internal hard drive. Pulling and decoding those digital logs prior to the press release would undeniably serve as the ultimate rock-solid basis for clearing their names. Forget everything because hard numbers never lie. Unlike a crafted story, raw data demands zero translation. It simply lays the brutal truth bare. But we have to dig much deeper than that surface level. Proving a specific ride was nowhere near the crime scene at the exact moment of chaos does a lot more than just clear a single suspect's name. It actually shines a massive spotlight on the leftover pieces. We suddenly notice the stray cars, the weird foot traffic, and the out-of-place details ripping a massive hole right through the middle of the detective's evidence board. Yet that exact void is what points us straight toward the actual target, at least according to seasoned professionals. Stripping away the obvious clutter is often the only way to expose the bizarre mysteries left behind, making this particular automobile a massive piece of the puzzle. Consider it a critical milestone. It serves as an absolute anchor, proving what failed to occur, which immediately shrinks the radius down to what truly went down. Detectives never actually dragged this vehicle away with a court order, but simply asked nicely and got the green light from the relatives. While that might just look like standard bureaucratic paperwork, it is secretly a massive red flag. Because normally during these types of probes uncovering rock-solid proof forces investigators to chase every single thread, even when the ultimate truth remains completely up in the air. We really have to look at this absolute mess from every conceivable angle, especially considering the recent developments involving law enforcement over in Pima County. Just last week, every single deputy in that jurisdiction cast a total vote of no confidence against Sheriff Nanos, ultimately forcing the top brass to step down from his post entirely. Cops normally skip the polite requests and just bulldoze straight through the legal red tape. Opting to ask for a favor rather than kicking down the door with a mandate reveals a very telling strategy. Investigators clearly had a hunch worth sniffing out, but lacked the smoking gun needed to lock anyone up. Basically, they desperately wanted a peek inside that ride without having enough solid dirt to formally tie it to the crime. The findings from that entire inspection remain completely buried under lock and key. Zero leaks and absolutely no forward momentum shared with the press in the immediate aftermath. Top-tier analysts actually consider this radio silence to be incredibly standard procedure, as the bombshell evidence only drops when the trap is ready to spring. Let us pivot toward the next twisted angle of this narrative. Throughout the entire auditing phase, investigators keep circling back to three highly specific, non-random blocks of time. The first batch stems from digital logs, the second from ground-level evidence gathering, and the third locks onto the actual evening of the tragedy. The truly wild part is not the specific dates, but how they collectively drag our focus backward into the past. Whatever went down in the shadows leading up to that fateful evening might hold way more weight than the actual bloodbath itself. Hardware tracking pinged one of these crucial windows, hinting that somebody was prowling around the perimeter way before the madness actually kicked off. Meanwhile, task forces spent hours hunting for camera footage captured on a very particular afternoon prior to the event. We are looking at a pair of completely distinct origins and timelines that still manage to intersect at the exact same target. This is definitely not some random fluke, as it strongly suggests the nightmare started brewing long before anyone even smelled smoke. Detectives are not just obsessing over the midnight hour of the attack, but rather the seemingly peaceful afternoons leading up to it. Three distinct chronological markers. None of these are accidental pings, considering they exclusively land on weekends right before the catastrophe struck. The fascinating twist here is that heavily scrutinizing those first two digital breadcrumbs completely redefines the significance of the final one. We are no longer looking at the genesis of the crime, but quite possibly its grand finale. Digital logs from one of those markers caught someone lurking around the vicinity for a significantly long stretch beforehand. Slamming those initial two chronological dots right next to each other suddenly paints a terrifyingly clear picture. Luck has absolutely nothing to do with it, because continuously showing up at the same spot on a schedule is a deliberate revisit, and people only loop back around when they have a strict agenda. Spotting that exact same routine spread across several digital records opens the door to a much darker theory, hinting at heavy calculated surveillance. Someone was likely setting the stage behind the scenes, turning this into a meticulously planned operation, rather than a spur-of-the-moment explosion. Viewing the board from this angle implies the violence that night was simply the closing curtain. After staking out a target long enough, human habits naturally expose themselves. The stalker noted the nights the household through parties tracked, when the bedroom lamps finally clicked off, and most critically waited for the exact second the guests drove away, leaving the property in dead silence, leaving just a single victim completely isolated in the house. For a predator who has been glued to the binoculars for weeks, that golden window of opportunity is entirely expected. It served as the ultimate green light to strike, which brings us to a crucial dynamic. In any chain of tragic events, the final face caught on the timeline instantly becomes the prime suspect, driven purely by order rather than actual hard proof. Yet if a mastermind already knew how the police play the game, they could have easily manipulated the clock to their advantage, leaving us with one massive, glaring question. Did the killer purposely handpick that specific evening to strike? Not out of sheer luck, but to deliberately forge a paper trail designed to frame someone else. If that theory holds water, this suspicious vehicle is tied to way more than just a single evening of terror. It is the linchpin to a heavily orchestrated master plan. Looping back to the elephant in the room, why is that automobile still sitting in the lot? We are dealing with a blend of complex mechanical roadblocks and strict legal protocols. However, a far more critical strategy is at play here, like putting key forensic details on ice for the upcoming trials. They are not guarding it for today's headlines, but stockpiling it for the final courtroom showdown. Assuming the digital footprints inside that engine completely crush a major theory, its true worth isn't in painting the crime, but in crossing off the impossible scenarios. During investigations, this twisted dead ending of false trail is absolute gold. The second you burn a bogus theory to the ground, every single detective pivots hard toward the surviving clues. That sedan is not the silver bullet, but rather the ultimate guardrail, keeping the narrative on track. It cuts through the fog, leaving us with one undeniable reality at this stage of the game. The most explosive secret is still hiding in the shadows, waiting to be unleashed. Welcome back, guys. We are the dedicated squad, grinding around the clock to feed you the sharpest, fastest, and most razor-accurate scoops on the internet. We built Crime Hotspot Global from the ground up to deliver hard-hitting breakdowns, deep dives, and raw truths on the most chaotic open cases using nothing but rock-solid, verifiable public intelligence. If this deep dive blew your mind today, go ahead and smash that like button and definitely hit subscribe to fuel the algorithm and keep our operations running. Your backing is the exact fuel we need to keep hunting down these insane mysteries and bringing you premium tier breakdowns daily. Massive thanks for tuning in and riding shotgun with us through the darkness. From this story, the deepest lesson is not about fear, but about truth. In moments of chaos, people rush to judge blame and create stories that feel satisfying before the real facts have time to speak. But truth does not shout. It waits in silence, in patience, in evidence, and in the courage of those who refuse to be carried away by rumors. This reminds us that justice is not built on emotion alone. It is built on careful thought, honesty, and respect for what is real. There is also a powerful human message here: every life matters, and every person deserves fairness. When tragedy strikes, our responsibility is not to fuel suspicion, but to protect dignity, seek clarity, and stand with compassion. Technology records and investigation may help reveal facts, but our character is revealed by how we respond while the truth is still unfolding. A strong society is not one that reacts the fastest. It is one that listens, thinks, and chooses wisdom over noise. In a world full of assumptions, let us become people who value truth over gossip, patience over panic, and justice over prejudice. Because when darkness confuses the world, integrity becomes a light no light can ever extinguish.